Hi, everybody. My name is Wes Yee. I am the VP of Marketing at Sequoia Consulting Group. You've gotten lots of emails from me over the past couple of weeks, and apparently they work because you're all here, so thank you so much for coming. I want to just up front do a little housekeeping and thank Cloudflare for the space and their amazing team here. Really just fantastic. So thank you guys for the space. I want to thank our partners, Glint, for helping us set up this event. And then our speakers here, who I'll now go down and introduce. And I'll start with closest to me. I've got Sue Olson, the head of HR for Turn. She's been with Turn since 2013 and was previously at IBM. And then next to her, I've got Jose Cong. He's the founder of a company in stealth mode, which is one of the coolest things you can do when you tell somebody where you work. And he previously built teams at Apple, Nest, and Google. And then on the end, I have Sarah Nahm, the founder and CEO of Lever, and also previously at Google. So I would like to start by just going down the line and having you each talk a little bit about yourselves and your companies and give us each some context about what we're going to be talking about today.
Is this on? Yeah, it's on. So again, I'm Sue Olson, and I've been with Turn for 3 years this month. And we are an ad tech company. We're located in Redwood City, but we're global. A little bit about myself. Prior to that, I was with the company Demandtech, which was bought by IBM. So that was really fun to go through the acquisition with them. And prior to that, I actually was out for 10 years and stayed at home. We have 3 boys. So I made a decision to be out of the work world for a while, raise our sons, and then re-enter in.
And then if you could give us maybe some context on the size of the company, and then...
Oh, sure. The size of our company right now, we're at 330 employees, and probably the biggest thing that we're going through right now is we had a CEO change. Back in October, we had a new CEO come on board, and super supportive of culture and people, and it's been really dynamic to be working in an environment like that. We had to right-size when he first came in, and now we're on the really fun strategic planning part of the company.
Hey everyone, Jose Cong. Let's see. No one really cares about what I did before Apple. Everywhere I go, they just don't care, so I'm going to fast forward. At Apple, I was brought in early on. I was employee number 40 on the iPod team. And my job was literally to help to carve it out from, at the time, it was the Mac engineering team. And we grew that into what it became, for those of you who are not too young to remember the iPod. From there, I was one of the first. I'm sure, no, some people are not getting it. The iPod was the iPhone before the iPhone. And so I was blessed with the opportunity to be one of the first 5 employees to actually work on the iPhone, and got to see that scale. We went from 5 to several thousand in a couple of years, right? Tremendous amount of pressure at the time from all angles. Back in 2011, the day that I was promoted into a senior management position, the day that Apple became the world's most valuable company, I decided to quit. And so I remember having the conversation with my parents. After 8.5 years, I'm leaving. I'm going to go work inside of a garage, and I'm going to go work on a thermostat. And so I think my dad stopped talking to me for probably 2 weeks. He thought I made the worst decision of my life. But 4 years or 3 years after that, I was able to help scale from a little tiny company in a garage to an 1,100-person company that was acquired by Google. And exactly 13 months ago, I decided that I had spent already 8.5 years in a large company, and I knew that Google was on its way to overtaking Apple to become the world's most valuable company. So I thought, you know what, why not do it again? And so I left, decided to start my own company. I'm glad that I'm here because, back when I started at Nest, when I was in your shoes, there just weren't companies like Glint. There weren't any companies like Lever. There weren't any companies that actually were paying attention to what we needed as HR professionals. And so I left because I became frustrated with the inability to know what the employees were working on. I left because I was frustrated with, the lack of communication and understanding. There was a lot of filtering. And so, for the last 13 months, we have been researching a new solution, and we hope to introduce that in a couple of months.
Wow, what a tough act to follow. Well, hello everybody. My name is Sarah Nahm. I'm the founder and CEO at Lever. And I guess just to tell my journey, my journey really is about how I went from design and product to come to HR and talent and recruiting. So I studied design in school, and that's what I ended up kind of working on the product team inside of Google. Actually, I guess by way of having a really, really exciting year. My first job out of college was speechwriting for Marissa Mayer, so that was an unexpected turn, but obviously really, really fun. So I spent most of my time at Google on the Chrome team, and we went from launch to overtaking Internet Explorer as the world's most popular browser. And I think that for a lot of my friends and family, they're surprised to see me as the leader of a recruiting software company. But I think it's really obvious because my entire career, my education has all been actually about being attracted to problems that really affect society and affect, I think, like really human kind of problems. And so as I joined forces with my two co-founders, all of us were in search of what we thought of as sort of the biggest problem affecting organizations. And no matter who I talked to, whether it was interviewing, the C-suite, somebody who just joined the company, or a manager in engineering, a manager in sales, it was just so ubiquitous that talent was the toughest thing to get right in organizations. And that no matter how far we'd come in terms of technology or the internet or iPods suddenly becoming iPhones, people really found that no amount of technology was actually cracking the problem of collaborating as an organization. So I founded Lever in 2012 with the mission essentially to make hiring a shared responsibility of every single person in the company. And so our collaborative recruiting software now does everything from applicant tracking, interview feedback, interview scheduling, reporting and analytics. And then recently we just launched our second product, which we call Lever Nurture, which is all about empowering companies to actually nurture talent communities so that they can, go out there with their actual employer brand as a company, but actually more importantly, their mission and their voice, and to spend a lot more time cultivating relationships instead of tracking applicants. So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks everyone for those great introductions, and I'll just make a quick note. The fourth name on here, Joan Burke, unfortunately had an emergency come up, and so wasn't able to make it, but we'll push forward. I think, as we talked about building this program out and the topic of scaling culture, I think naturally for me the question for you guys was, when did you first realize that this was something that you had to do? So you're building out these different teams, building out these companies. What was the moment when, in your careers, when you first realized, like, hey, these cultures aren't going to define themselves. How can we build this in a way that is going to be sustainable, is going to keep the core values of our team together in a way that's going to, lead to success and turn a garage team into 1,000 people as opposed to a garage team into a bunch of homeless people? Why don't we start on that end?
Yeah, well, I feel really lucky. So I forgot the part where I told you about where Lever is at. We're 85 people, but starting, I guess, on Tuesday, we'll probably be around 90. We're still an early stage company, but what I feel really lucky about is that at every single stage of growth, we, through our customers, have always gotten a preview about the importance of hiring right, developing your own talent, the consequences of sort of, culture scaling wrong. So I think that for me, I get this wonderful meta problem, where as the founder of a company, I'm scaling this organization, but my business is helping other people scale organizations. So I always feel like for me, it was obvious through my research with people that a lot of lessons in HR are learned too late. And so a lot of actually what I feel like I've taken away is that getting it right from the beginning actually helps you get it right later. So we've really tried to take that to heart as a company, and on issues like, actually investing in your interviewer training or focusing on diversity and inclusion or, really thinking always one step ahead. That's one lesson I took to heart from how transparent and open I think HR as a culture is when it comes to best practice and knowledge sharing. I found that a lot of my customers actually are educating me.
Jose, was there a moment for you when a light bulb went off and you were like, gosh, when we go from 5 on the iPhone team to, was it 50, is it 100, is it 150, where you kind of had that moment of realization?
I think there were moments. I don't know that anyone can, recognize, because the biggest problem, when you think scale is that you don't think scale first, you think growth, right? And so for us, at multiple stages in my career, we realized that we were making the same mistakes. It was all about here's this arbitrary number that we need to hit, right, in order to ship the product, and the pressure was around that. And what we realized was that scaling and growing are two different issues, and anyone can grow. Right? Anyone can grow. You can have a great recruiting organization. You can have a great product, and sure, you're going to attract great talent. But if you're not set for scale, the pressure of high, energy individuals, pressure of individuals who are Type A personalities, is going to crush, that growth. And so, at different times, it hit us. Right? Intuition is not scalable. So how do you start to put processes in place and policies in order to do that? And I think we learned quite a bit, ramping significantly fast at Apple. And so when we first started Nest, the first HR rule that we created was no assholes, right? Absolutely no assholes. And what that translated to was, let's make sure that we are not so fixated on the person's technical abilities that we forego who this individual is. Because especially if you're scaling, right? And if you're scaling from a startup perspective, there are going to be days when things aren't going to go well, right? There are going to be days when you're taking 3 steps back. And if that person doesn't have the right personality to be able to be supportive, to be able to be motivating, it's not going to go well. So not necessarily a specific moment, but moments when we realize, what, we're growing too fast, we're not scaling, let's go ahead and pump the brakes.
I love the idea of having one core tenet of no assholes in this situation, and I wonder how many people in this audience, HR leaders, people leaders, have something like that, where it's one line that, if we make a decision on a person, they've got to fit this very important core value. Just maybe a show of hands. Anyone? You guys have something? What's yours? Mine? Yeah. Be nice. Be nice. Okay.
There you go.
Be fun. Be fun. Okay. A couple others. I saw some more hands. Passion. Have passion. Be curious. Oh, some good ones. What about you, Sue?
I would say I listen to 2 people who are driving an organization, and for me, being head of people at Turn and going through a couple of different leaders in the last 3 years, it's interesting because with our new CEO coming in October, he's very people and values driven. So literally the last 2 days we spent defining our values, redefining our values. We had 5 values that people didn't even realize were current values, so we weren't walking them in the organization. And so we took upon, Bruce is our CEO, and this is very critical for him. So yesterday as an executive team, we worked for 9 hours, kind of hammering them out. And then today we brought in the senior leadership team and just made sure that they resonated. And so we're walking out and activating them next week with our employees, or starting to. So I guess I say it's never too late, and sometimes companies have to pivot and redefine who they are based on leadership in the organization.
You talked about leadership, and I guess this has been a topic that I've had a lot of discussions about, and it's kind of unclear to me what the impact or the correct role is for a leader in building and scaling a culture. And I know even as we were preparing, I heard some conversations about they shouldn't have a role, or they need to have a very active role. I've heard kind of a lot of different things. I'd love to just kind of go down the line and sort of hear what your thoughts are on what level of buy-in is right, and where maybe they need to be hands-off.
Sure. So my philosophy around that is that you have to be careful to not tie the culture of the company to the founder or the leader. because if anything happens to that founder or that leader, there goes your culture. And having grown up in environments where people had a strong personality, tying the culture to that individual sometimes was great when they were in a good mood, but it was not so good if they weren't in a good mood. And so, the way I see it, culture is probably the hardest thing for your competition to copy. So it's got to be the most important aspect for you to invest in. And because there's not one person that can ship out a product by themselves, you have to allow the leader to be supportive of the culture. The leader should have a say on boundaries, but should not dictate what the culture is. The culture, I think, it's reshaped every single time somebody joins the company or somebody leaves the company. And you just have to be mindful, right, that you are tracking it. Someone told me this a couple of weeks ago, and they said the best way to look at culture is to realize that culture is the worst thing that you're willing to tolerate within your organization. And if you think about it from that perspective, you're going to realize that you're going to have to invest and pay attention to it. But again, we're talking about a collection of individuals. It shouldn't be tied to any one of them. When I was at Nest, I was actually made head of culture. And the first thing that I did was remove the chief culture title. I'm like, I don't want that. It should not be me. It shouldn't be the founders. It shouldn't be me. We need to figure out what our values are. We need to figure out what we bring to the table collectively and make sure that we all have ownership in that so we can defend the culture.
So Sarah, I'm seeing a lot of nodding over there. So as a CEO, is it really?
Yeah, well, Jose is just espousing so much wisdom.
Are you really intentional about sort of not being the person that culture is tied to, but being the one who is supporting and pushing those values throughout the organization?
Yeah, I think that obviously sort of our journey has probably been a little bit different from Jose's because, maybe the one you're going through now, but when we were a really young team and, the sort of core of Lever, the people that really first hacked out our very first product offering, we were less than 10 people for quite a long time. And one choice that we made that I think was incredibly definitive of our culture was actually to wait to define the culture. We knew that as a company, and we wanted to be a company in the long term, we knew that we weren't always just going to be 8 engineers and 2 designers. We knew that the scaled culture of Lever had to be more elastic. It had to actually be able to include all the things that we would need to do as a company and as a team. And if we just sort of sat down and tried to find the Venn diagram overlap of all the individuals of the team at that time, we would be missing out on a lot of really, really important attributes and values, and I think just sort of like humanity that we would actually need to accommodate. And so actually I'm really proud that it's only now that me and my team are going through the process of really penning our values and our culture and articulating it, because now we have an engineering team, a product team, a sales team, a marketing team, a people team, a recruiting team. We have all these different teams now, so I really feel actually that it's time. And unsurprisingly, one of the values that we're actually penning is inclusion. Because I think that whole spirit, that sense that we had as an early team was all about wanting to actually be a really inherently and fundamentally inclusive company culture.
So I'm curious, as you've been going through this transition of bringing on a new CEO and being really intentional about scaling, what are some of the guideposts or strategic points that you've emphasized with the CEO?
Getting a healthy culture or healthy company. So one thing we have done is, again, I think we're at a pivotal point. We had a layoff in Q4, so that's tough to come back in the new year, new CEO. And so it's interesting because Bruce said yesterday, he said we could not have done this exercise any earlier, but he was pushing for it earlier. And we just weren't at that point yet. It's hard to ask all your people to come in and do that after you've just let go of a lot of people in your organization. So I think that's one thing, is strategically working with him to build a healthy organization. That's what the focus was. I don't know if anyone's read the book, The Advantage. Has anyone heard of that? So that is what we went over. Actually, 5 weeks ago, we went through the 5 questions. It's by Patrick Lencioni. He's written the 5 dysfunctions and now the advantage, which I think is much more forward-thinking. And so we've used that consulting group, and through that, we've defined with a new CEO what's our core purpose, how, and the second question where we spent the most amount of time yesterday was, how do we behave? So we did a lot of scripting. I had gone out before in the organization and done 7 what I called value sessions and picked anyone that had received a promotion and who executives had identified as high potentials. And that's who I brought into the groups and then made sure they were from all departments and all regions, were global. And just really listened and did a big intake and brought that data yesterday to our sessions and made sure that there was overlap with our executive team. So I would say that's one of our big strategic from a people perspective right now, because then that will begin to drive all our processes now that we have the values. It will begin to drive our hiring. We haven't had performance management system in our company. We've been around for 11 years, so now we'll ground it with those values. The values will begin to build the foundation of how we expect people to show up and behave, and we haven't had that before.
I want to go a little bit deeper on one thing that you referenced, the idea of a healthy culture. What is that? What is the definition of that? What are the indicators that will tell you that, hey, we're there, we're getting there?
Great question. I think the activation of our values. So we came up with 4. We had 3, and then we decided we needed to throw a 4th one in there. And so if we're going to get back together in 6 months, and our metric will be, are we healthy? And we'll be able to see, we're really going to identify and make sure everyone is curious in the organization, and we're very technical, and so we even took away some of the, we wanted to make sure everybody, curious wasn't just technical curiosity, it was just being curious in your work, getting things done. The next one was tenacious, the humble, and then the last one to kind of wrap was no BS. So we want very straightforward, direct feedback. We've had some side conversations or the meeting after the meeting, and so all these values are just going to really begin to support behaviors that we want to left the organization and or are there, and now we can make sure people are changing and really moving forward with healthy behaviors when they show up every day.
So I've heard no assholes, I've heard no BS. One thing that sort of comes to mind when I hear about some of these sort of almost like this is a rule kind of thing, for us to be successful, we've got to adhere to these policies, these values. What does the enforcement of that look like? How do you ensure that happens? Because it's one thing to say no assholes, but it's another to see a couple people having the meeting after the meeting and making different decisions than what they just agreed upon, and actually saying like, hey, wait a second, we agreed, what is that? Is there training that's involved in that? Does it have to be leadership saying, hey, I'm seeing this, and this is what we just agreed we're not going to do? So how does that work in practice? Why don't we start on the end?
Yeah, well, I think it almost goes back to what really is culture. Is culture the words on the wall, or is culture how people make decisions, how meetings are run, how you hire, who you fire, right? I mean, that's, I think, what is ultimately kind of flying around all these kind of nuggets is really that culture is in the actions in the workplace, not in the language necessarily. And so the language is a vehicle to help people remember how to act. And something I work a lot with my kind of team of folks on, both recruiting and HR and employee experience. I mean, we talk a lot about designing tools for people, things people use, because if you're going to do something as a manifestation of culture, you should actually think about what you're producing coming out of your HR, your people ops, or your recruiting teams as tools for the rest of the organization. And I think those can be communication tools, and then they have to be memorable, they have to be something people can feel attached to. But I think there's a lot of really interesting ways to create tools, and tools can be, pretty early stage experimental prototype tools, or they can be sort of late stage evolved, foundational tools. I think you have to kind of know what kind of tool you're really going for. But what I love about tools is that for my team, you can talk about, well, you have tools at home. You've got your hardware stuff, you got your hammer, you've got your, other screwdrivers and all your tools. Well, you have a toolbox, but you don't use all the tools all the time. So I think the beauty of thinking about HR practices, processes, a lot of people hate the process word in startups, right? Is to actually think about them as things that when they are needed, you bring them out. And I think that, it may be that you only have to redo your values every couple years, but nothing, I think, should be sacred if they're supposed to be used. And if the value and worth of them is in how often they're used in the office, in the meetings, in the decisions. So I think when I think about combating dysfunction or politics or performance or any of these things, I try to push myself to think about what I really want people to do in the day-to-day and then work backwards from there.
Jose, what are some of the guideposts that you've put up either at past companies or that you're actively putting up now?
Accountability has to be number one. So if you say no assholes and someone's acting like an asshole, you have to let them go, right? You have to be as assertive hiring as you do firing. And to me, I think of a story. I won't mention the company, I won't mention the individual, but I remember, we were having trouble shipping a particular piece of a platform. And we knew that there was something with the senior leader of the group. And we literally sat there and began to realize this person was being an asshole. I remember I was sick. I was sick this particular day. I remember getting a text message that this person had called someone a fucking idiot. And so I snapped when I read that, literally threw on a hoodie and sweats and drove 45 minutes to get to the office, walked in, and I fired the person on the spot. Right? And when he asked me what authority I had to fire him, I told him, well, you just saw it, you're fired. And this is what happened afterwards. We went from having an inconclusive shipping date to actually shipping the product on time, right, without our most senior member. So it comes down to accountability. If that is a core value, a core rule that you have to be willing. You have to be willing to enforce it, otherwise your employees are not going to take it seriously.
As a longtime baseball player, have had to run many, many miles as punishment. I know how important and authentic accountability is in motivation. So, Sue, maybe just give some sense of how you're sort of looking at it as you try to get the organization to a healthier place. What are some of the things that you're going to look at and put in place to make sure that the employees who are there and the CEO is behind the plan and the rollout?
Sure. So this is, again, great in timing because yesterday we said, gosh, everybody's going to want to know, what does the marketing material look like? And so we, actually today we ended the meeting with saying the most important thing is as leaders in the organization, and there was about 40 of us in the room. So we were deliberate in bringing in the senior leadership so that we could work through it and have buy-in. And the biggest thing is we just said tomorrow you show up and you behave based on these values, and one thing we have to do is spend a lot of time in our hiring practices. That's an area where we don't have well-defined. And again, I said we haven't had performance management in the past. We just invested in reflective, so that's an area now we have a foundation where we'll be, when we do our goals and our performance management, we'll be measuring against those values. We use Glint, and that was the first question yesterday or today was, can we do a question in our next Glint in regards to values? So, and we have our recognition programs, and now also our CEO is starting to call out behaviors that he wants and is recognizing, I shouldn't say wants, that he's recognizing as we're promoting. So it's just being very, I think for us as leaders in the organization, and we walked out and said it's not the people organization, we're going to bring in the processes and the framework and the support, but it's going to be the leaders of the people that are really going to be the way they show up and behave, to have the accountability to call out the behavior, or on the flip, or also to be accountable to promote based on the behavior of the values. So, to me, it's the systems, but then just really walking the walk in your organization every day.
One thing I heard a couple times here was the idea of using tools, and I think I wonder if there's some strategy here for HR and people leaders where it's easy to pay lip service as a leader to culture and we want to be measuring performance, yada, yada, yada. But actually solidifying it in, hey, we bought this tool, is that maybe a way that people can push these initiatives forward and say like, hey, we bought this tool, we've got to use it. We need to get the time on your calendar. We need to get everybody in the organization on board with this, or else we've wasted this money. And it sort of serves as a forcing function. Is that something that any of you have thought of and as an intentional part of the strategy?
So for me, I'm agnostic to what tools I'm going to use, right? When I started my career, we just didn't have great tools. Now, there are some great tools out there, but the tools are 50% of the answer. The other 50%, you have to be intentional. If you're going to commit to acquiring, a tool, you have to make sure that it's not just a PO, right, that you're signing and getting it. You have to make sure that you're driving results back to the employees, because otherwise there's going to be fatiguing, right? You can only get so much information out of me if I don't see changes. So you have to be careful, because once you deploy a tool, you have to make sure that you are committing to analyzing the data, acting on the data based on your analysis, and facing the employees, even if you're making decisions that are going against what the employee expects. You just have to be intentional. You have to use it. To me, even if you're going to use, Google Docs, which, gosh, don't. You'll forget all about it, right? Use intelligent tools instead. But even if you're going to do that, make sure that you're being intentional and that you're being genuine in terms of looking at the data and trying to figure out what it is that your employees are telling you. And again, even if it's a tough conversation, you have to have the conversation. Otherwise, they're going to get fatigued and they're not going to give you the right information.
Yeah, well, if Jose is agnostic, I'm obviously very biased. Yeah, I mean, as a creator of tools to empower, recruiting and HR teams, actually, I've put a lot of thought into, why have great tools not existed in the past? Why is it that, technology in HR for so long has languished in this sort of ineffective state? And so we really translated, as we were developing Lever, we translated that, those mistakes of the past into what we believe to be the future of tools in this space, which is the last thing that any of you guys need is yet another silo built around your world, right? The last thing any of you guys need is to have to, manually go to every single, business partner's desk or hiring manager's desk trying to cajole them into doing something for you. And so we actually, when we designed Lever, really actually thought about activating the entire company on the tools. And I think if you guys are shopping for technologies, whether it's on recruiting or any other facet of your work, you have to actually really think about every single tool now as a collaboration platform, where you're not just looking at it through your eyes of what you want to get out of it or what data you want to get out of it, but you have to actually think about, well, can this be something that actually engages everybody to grow this company with me? And so for us, that translates into building a beautiful product, a simple product, a real-time product, one where you actually feel like there's other people in there with you. Because actually, HR has this reputation for being in this silo by itself, but it's actually one of the most socially connected functions in the company. It's the most. And, it's finally time that the technology looked that way too and felt that way too. So we're doing, our small part, but I think for the most part, when you have a choice between, I don't know, some, HR product out there that has all the bells and whistles, or one that you think your team will actually use alongside you, I'd urge you to work together instead of working alone.
So you referenced a couple of tools that you guys are implementing and using regularly. What have been some of the wins, and how have you gotten to get people on board with adopting those tools?
Yeah, I would say, as I think about it, Glint was really pivotal for us. So we bought the tool back in early 2014, and I have to say we were not deliberate about it, and so it actually fell flat. And then when Bruce came in, he wanted to look at the data. He's a real data guy, and he started looking at it. And we are now on a cadence of every quarter we're doing a pulse, and And again, it's a tool that our team owns, but we've now it's cascaded down in our executive meeting. We share with one another after we receive our pulse what one or two things we're going to work on based on our scores. So each department is responsible for that. And then Bruce, as the CEO, actually, that's what really drove all the values and culture discussions that we're having, because that was clear when we received our pulse back, our data. That's where we were not doing well in that area. So we are really a data-driven organization, and I have to say it's been really fun to watch. So our first quarter after Bruce came in, all the executives had it. Then I asked a couple of different departments to pilot it, leaders, and they did. They were the ones that were the most curious, coming to me and saying, hey, how can I get more data out of this? So I piloted it with a couple of leaders, and now all of our senior leadership have their dashboard, their tools, and when we do a pulse now, in real time, they are looking at their data, and they're actually starting to make shifts for the positive. An example of that is last quarter, someone was looking at a manager and saw that he was scoring low, and actually the next day, within 24 hours, did skip levels and with folks on his team, and then just provided very direct feedback to coach him. He's a new manager, and I thought that's the way you want a highly functioning organization to be. The manager wasn't threatened. It was a very deliberate process, and good results are coming from it. So. And I think the other tool that we're just starting to roll out, I think, again, we're a very data-driven organization, highly technical, so our population likes really fast, light tools. I have to say that. They don't like cumbersome tools, and they like quick results and data that they understand and can do something with.
How many out there have some sort of quantitative metric that they're individually or as a team measured on as a people function? Just quick show of hands. And then maybe just give me an idea of what those metrics are right here.
For us, we are a finance accounting organization. Everything is numerical and deadline oriented. So we use email as a base of it, but we measure everything by the calendar. What is being done in time, not in time. So we have a green zone, yellow zone, red zone.
Couple others? Retention. Okay. Right here. Sorry, one more time. Employee happiness, okay. Maybe one more.
Onboarding scores remain to be 90% or
Onboarding scores, okay. Cool. It's not the specific topic we're here to talk about, but I've heard it come up a couple times already, and I think it really is core to scaling a culture, and that's diversity and inclusion. Want to try to get a sense of where you feel like you are with it. Maybe some initiatives going forward, or just pieces of it that you're being intentional about going forward. Just want to give people kind of an understanding of like what they need to be thinking about for this really critical issue. Why don't we start with you, Sue?
So ours would be just organic at this point in time. We just have not put as much time, but I think we're doing a good job. We are diverse, we are inclusive, but I can't say we have specific programs around that at this point in time. Well, I shouldn't say that. For example, and again, we spin things up pretty quickly. We have a group called Women at Turn, where we quarterly have, and anyone can be involved in that, but we are very deliberate and specific about having a panel and having a woman on the panel speaking at this point in time. In the future, we'll probably have men as well. But that's one, so we have special interest groups like that we have, but that's the stage we're at right now.
This is one of my favorite topics because diversity and inclusion is, I think, something that I'm personally passionate about. It's something that I feel really honored that in leading a company I get to work on. And actually what's been fantastic about it being such a big part of Lever from actually our really early days, we were probably the only 10-person startup that had a D&I monthly council and talked about it and did all sorts of activities and programs and experiments. back when we were actually that small. And the one thing I'll say that's just sort of a takeaway is just get started. Because, I think like we were 10 people, none of us had launched a D&I program. None of us knew even fully what it was like to run programs like that at scale, but I think the fact that we did those small things at the beginning has led to it being something that brings people to Lever, that makes people choose to sign their offers and join Lever, and that it just attracts more and more energy to the company that has started to actually, what I'm really excited about is now we're actually starting to see the returns and the results, and a lot of people ask what D&I brings to an organization, and I can tell you that it brings passion and productivity and retention and pride. So, specifically, we're doing things large and small, folded into really like all the obvious parts, all the surprising parts of our company. I think it's something as small as somebody on our engineering team coming up to me the other day and saying, I think we should have transgender-friendly bathroom signs, to people who are really focusing deeply on how we can methodically remove unconscious bias from our interview process and scale that. So really, I could go on and on about it, but and certainly if any of you guys want to talk about it, I'm happy to stick around, but I think that the most important thing is to just start. And if the only thing that you guys start doing, if there's one concrete thing that you guys do on D&I, especially as pertains to scaling culture, is to really ask what culture fit means to your organization and think about the implication that has on diversity. I think if there's kind of like, one aspect about scaling culture is to be willing to really challenge your own assumptions about what your cultural definitions are and whether those are holding you back from making progress on diversity. For every time an interviewer says, is this person a culture fit? Just change the question from are they a culture fit to what contribution would they make to our culture? And immediately, I think you can see results of people's mind shifting in really powerful ways. So I'm obviously really passionate about it, and I think there's a lot of experimentation happening. I talked to a lot of companies of all shapes and sizes who are choosing to define D&I in different ways, whether it's women in tech or minorities in just kind of the company overall or however. But I think that there's so much exciting stuff happening. HR and people teams are innovating on how to tackle D&I, and I think especially here in Silicon Valley, in the Bay Area, we're leading this issue globally, and I think that's very exciting.
Before we switch to Jose, I want to get a sense of the room, kind of get a informal benchmarking. How many out there have just started, have something going on, a program? Show of hands. Yeah, so not too surprising, actually. We're putting together a D&I program for New York in a couple of weeks, and a lot of the companies we talk to, they're like, we're really interested. We haven't quite sorted that out. So I think you're among good people, but yeah, it seems like just get that snowball rolling. Yeah.
Oh boy, you guys ready? Here's where I become very controversial. So, despite my last name, I was actually born in Mexico, so I identify myself as Latino. And I'll tell you guys a story. I joined Apple. At the time, iTunes was pretty hot, and we used to throw parties once a month, and so I would bring a diverse group of friends with me as my guests. And I remember the question, one of my buddies looks at me and asks, where is the diversity? And the people that were around there looked at me, and that was, it was uncomfortable, right? So, the one thing I learned at a dinner a couple of weeks ago with a bunch of CHROs was that it's not just about diversity and inclusion, but it's also about belonging. You have to throw the B in there, right? Because it's one thing for you to go out of your way to admit that you have a problem and you need to be diversified. Another thing to, want to be inclusive and go out of your way to attract individuals. But if you don't make me feel like I belong, I'm most likely not going to stick around. And so that's one aspect of my thinking. The other is be careful. Be careful with the pressure that exists today. I'm so glad that the Silicon Valley is leading, right, this particular cause, because I see it happen all the time, right? And earlier in my career, I saw it happen and I didn't do anything about it, right? But now I'm very vocal about it to the point where I'm controversial, and sometimes it costs me speaking engagements. But don't assume that you have to hire by quota, right? Don't assume that you have to go hire, someone from Mexico like me. Because the second I feel that I'm just a token hire, the second I feel that I'm a quota, two things are gonna happen. Immediately, I'm gonna know that I'm not gonna be respected or recognized for the impact that I can bring. And two, I'm gonna know that I don't wanna work for you, right? And so just make sure that you're always looking for the best possible hire. What you have to do in order to be diverse, inclusive, and allow people to belong is you have to be smart about recognizing that we all have biases, right? And you have to be open-minded enough to discuss those biases as an interview group to make sure that they're out there and people understand that. And two, you have to make sure that you are, expanding your talent pool. But don't be that organization where you're gonna, celebrate the fact that you hire X percentage of women, X percentage of transgender folks, X percentage of Latino or Black employees. Don't do that. Go out of your way to make sure that you are expanding the pool, recognize where your biases are, but make sure that ultimately you hire the best, most qualified person that fits your culture.
I do want to get some questions from the audience, so if you have those, or if you don't, start to think of some of those. But before we do, I want to do a quick lightning round and just go down and get some tips from you guys. You guys are doing some amazing things, and just want to start with, what is a good work-life balance tip that you might be able to share?
My good work-life balance tip is I go out and run early in the morning with a group of women, and I'm committed to it, and actually Bruce has told me I need to do that. So there was a period of time where my team wasn't built out, so I was covering the globe, so I was literally starting at about 5 in the morning, and I worked across the regions and working till about 11 at night, and I committed back in by Q2 that I would be running again in the morning. That's how I re-energize myself and get creative thinking done. So, and I would say, building a strong team so that you can delegate. I mean, that's what, for me, that's what was the key, is I was missing some components there.
For my company, there are 11 of us. We have one rule. If we're gonna work late into the evening or weekends, you have to get prior approval. Because what we wanna know is why we are misjudging the scheduling and why we're finding ourselves having to put extra time. And the encouragement that I give my team is to be more open and realistic when you're committing to a delivery on a deadline. Sure, there are going to be times where we are going to have to step up and work potentially overnight, but I don't want that to be an ongoing situation. I want to make sure that we're constantly discussing, why the need for that. And so, today I was checking my Slack channel before we joined on the stage. And it was great that my co-founder literally sent a message to everyone saying, 3-day weekend, we have a long 8 weeks ahead of us. Take the time off. Don't come into the office. Please don't log in unless you have to. And if you have to, please let us know why. So that's how we manage life-work balance.
Yeah, if you have to come in, we'll publicly shame you.
Exactly.
I want to know what the tips on publicly shaming people are next. So,
I'll be the first to admit that work-life balance is an ongoing struggle to me, mostly because my company's changing, my team is changing, and what I've kind of found personally is that it's less about time in office, time checking email, and more about energy and motivation and inspiration. And so my main thing for combating the feeling that my work-life balance is getting out of control is actually to return to what I find energizing and inspiring, and taking the time to do that. So making sure that I actually create space to actually get motivated and inspired. Because everybody comes to me to be inspired, and I have to get some kind of inspiration myself. So whether that's actually taking the time to attend events or read books, or increasingly for me, it's actually to spend more time with my early employees. I feel like the connection that I have with that group rejuvenates me, reminds me of our mission. And then no matter what work comes my way, I just feel more capable of dealing with it. I feel more capable of taking charge. And so in that sense, I think a lot of people try to combat stress with relaxation. I try to combat stress with energizing myself.
We talked about tools and technology that you guys have found value in. I wonder if you could share, it could be a tool, but maybe it's a book or some sort of artifact or something that the folks in here could get a hold of that might help them in their daily lives. Let's start with you, Sue. You can't use the book again.
Oh, I can't. Oh, gosh. I would just say, again, because we haven't had, we didn't have the support to invest in the people org before in tools. And I would say it's the tools that are really pivotal for us as an organization and for my department. And again, it started with Glint, Reflective. The next thing on the roadmap will be, we're looking at ATS systems right now. I mean, it's unbelievable because we're 330 employees and we do not have a functioning HRIS system up. So you can imagine the drain that puts on my team. So for me, it's just these tools that are bringing the data to the organization so that we're partnering with the organization instead of the organization coming to us and asking to administer. So I'm loving that real pivot that we're seeing in our department.
Jose, what are you buying me for Christmas?
So first of all, I'm hearing good things about Lever as an ATS.
I know.
So you should definitely check it out. I've been doing some research for some of the companies that I advise, and I have you guys on the list. It's one of the best ones. So you know what? There is a book that I think everyone needs to read. If you are looking to create an intrinsic motivated workforce where autonomy, purpose, and mastery it's what drives the company and fuels the culture, you have to get everyone to have ownership of what they do and be self-starters and be leaders. The book that I'm going to get you is The Situational Leader. Great book. It's not that it's not that big. It's pretty light material, but I find myself going back to it probably once a quarter and just rereading it over and over and over. It has had a great deal of influence on me. And in our company, we actually give a copy to every new employee.
That's great. And Sarah, what are you going to give Jose for all the referrals he's sending your way?
Well, there's a lot of ways to answer this question, but I think I'll answer the thing that's actually genuinely had the most impact on me as a leader and as a leader of my company and my teams, which has been to actually invest in having a coach. And I don't know how many of you guys maybe, have had experiences with coaching or executive coaches or any of that, but I found it just such an incredible, valuable asset to have somebody that can help me see my own challenges in a new light. And there's actually so many ways nowadays to kind of like access, I think, the benefits of taking that sort of proactive step in sort of developing your own growth. So there's group coaching, there's actually learning to be a coach. I'm sure a lot of you guys have kind of explored those sorts of things for your company, but it's something that I do personally. I've spread to my co-founders, I've infected my entire executive team, so now all of us are hooked on coaching. But it feels like a luxury, but it has been just so groundbreaking for me in terms of having somebody to help me through my own growth.
All right, I think now it's a good time to take some questions. We will stick around after, so we've got the space for about another hour if you want to hang out and talk to some of the speakers. But let's take a couple questions. One here.
Yeah. So I didn't even understand how exactly culture is different from two great companies. Because when I read all the culture statement, they all look like based on the common sense. Like nobody want to hire assholes, and everybody want to hire good people. Be nice. So how exactly is it different? Why is it hard to copy cultures? Is it not the same like common sense?
So why is it hard to copy cultures? Because they have so many commonalities in them.
It goes back to intentionality, right? Anybody can put words on the website, right? Anyone can say, no assholes, but unless you're willing to enforce it, right? That's not a culture. And you're right. Common sense common sense will dictate that if everybody does it, everyone should be the next Google, the next Facebook, the next
Common
Apple.
sense is uncommon. I don't remember who said that. But.
Exactly, but reality is that each situation is different, and it starts with the people. And starts with the people that seeded, that organization from the beginning. Again, I go back to culture. Culture is influence and change. Every time somebody joins the company, especially at a higher level, such as the CEO, as well as anytime somebody leaves. Because it could be that maybe this person was an asshole and now everyone's getting along better, or it could be that that was the quiet individual that everyone had faith in, and they see him leave, and now people begin to wonder whether or not, right, the company's a good place to be. So you have to be intentional. You have to stay true to your roots. What is your manifesto? What are your values? And you have to just keep enforcing it. You have to keep talking about it. As leaders, you have to stand behind them. As HR leaders, you have to make sure that you remind everyone that the importance of culture. If culture could be copy, again, everybody would be an Apple, right? Everybody would be a Google, and that's not the case.
Take two more right here.
During the process of defining your cultural values, to what extent should they be aspirational, and to what extent should they be a reflection of what already exists?
I asked myself the same question not too many months ago, and something I'm just using as a rule of thumb, because I think authenticity is really important. Like, ultimately, it's aspiration versus authenticity, right? Is we do think about, using kind of the ruler where the people who are really at the heart of the company, who are probably not going anywhere, so myself, my co-founders, but also some of the people who are really the heart and soul of the company, you can't really have a value that's so off that you're actually going to introduce hypocrisy, right? So I think to that extent, we try not to have any value, and it sometimes comes to the real art of the nuanced definition or the articulation, the word you choose. But we really try to have those values check off against every single founder. And then if that goes really well, then you check it off on the next layer. And if that goes well, you check off on the next layer. And you actually see how kind of core can this thing be? Do we actually get weird feelings because it's so off the mark that we feel like we're being hypocritical? Or does it actually feel like there's this emanating sense that the heart of it is really authentic? And then everybody, I think the further you get out, the more and more it can be aspirational, because I think you really want to have that core of authenticity, even if for the broader population it feels like an aspiration.
Let me add a little bit to that. She's absolutely right, but here's the one thing, how I measure the authenticity. If I'm gonna stand in front of the board and tell them what this is, are they gonna roll their eyes? If I'm gonna stand in front of the company and make something so out there that it is inspirational, but it doesn't really reflect what we do, and they're gonna roll their eyes. And even worse, right, is that something that a potential candidate in the future is gonna buy into it or not? So you just make sure that it reflects, the meaning of who you wanna be.
So I'm going to answer a different question, where it's almost like you're saying, you asked basically, how do you choose between us, or who you are today and not? And I'd almost say, instead of thinking of character traits, actually encourage people as they're developing values to pick out moments, defining moments. I think that when you overly focus on people's personality, or their sort of character traits, you get distracted by all this noise about people. But I actually think what defines organizations' values is how you decide, or how you fail, or what those defining moments and what happened there. And I think what was the collective ignorance that led to that being our biggest mistake, or what was the collective kind of the voice that ultimately saved us from making that huge mistake. And I think that's where you end up finding the aspirations in a really healthy way. It's not about valorizing some character trait. It's about actually remembering what we should remember from our mistakes and what we should remember from our successes. So maybe if you ever find yourself overly focusing on people and describing people at your company, think about instead describing defining moments.
So one more question in the back. No? Okay. We'll take it right here.
How do you all incorporate health and wellness into your company cultures? Because obviously if you help employees to be happier, more productive, so what are some of the things that you guys are doing in that area?
So the question is about how you incorporate health and wellness as part of the company culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, so we've experimented quite a lot with, I guess you could call perks or programs and things, and people obviously love things like gym memberships, and they love the opportunities they have to actually, I don't know, get that little nudge. One nuance that we've found though is that when it comes to health and wellness, the same way that you kind of personally get kind of like a little bit less motivated after your gym membership goes on for like 2 or 3 months, I think employees have a similar perspective on these sorts of habits. So one thing that we are about to do that I'm really excited about is we're introducing sort of a quarterly rotation of health and wellness programs, because the novelty is actually a great way to attract people to wellness practices. So it's like, oh, we've been doing meditation, but then your interest in meditation kind of goes down, and now we're doing this other thing. And I think actually thinking about behavioral change and how hard it is, and actually taking that to heart and thinking about how can I help employees make healthy decisions, but acknowledging that we're all human. I think that our people team is doing so much creative stuff in just really thinking about all of our employees as sort of, human beings, and how can you make these programs actually come to life and really delight people. Is a great way to make sure that it's good ROI on your spend, and actually it's not that hard to change out once a quarter what that one health and wellness program is, and people just get so excited. So I think it can be even just changing what you do periodically can really help people just renew their interest in taking care of themselves.
I'll give you something that we did at Nest that was highly successful. We actually encourage individuals to create clubs around wellness and health. And what we realized was that because it was employee-driven, we provided the funds and we provided the facilities, that they were able to invite individuals, right? And we saw it take off. By the time I left, there was a fighting club, right? Where they were literally doing kickboxing in the parking lot.
You're not supposed to talk about that, right?
Right. There were two cycling teams. One that every Tuesday and Thursday they did 35 miles before work, and another one that was a little more leisure. We saw hiking and walking clubs, and actually at the end it was cost effective, right? We got employees to actually care more about their health, but ultimately it actually helped with the culture, because it became a very social environment where people were not spending time talking about work, and they were spending time actually just getting to know each other.
So what we've done and has worked well for us is we call them ambassadors in each of our United States offices, and then we have ambassadors in our region, and then from our department we give budget, but then the region gets to do what they want to do based on the culture, their desires, their interests. And I would say, so we have things that we call special interest groups that are just an email alias, and you can just meet people and go for a hike or whatever you want to do. Then we actually do the traditional, people can expense up to $50 a month for a gym, or we don't really put parameters around it as long as it's for health. Like a lot of people are using it for Soul Cycle right now. Again, we're still at that point where we don't have to have a lot of policy in place as long as it's for wellness. And then we serve lunch, and we're super intentional about our lunch and snacks, and our beverages are on the health side. So we don't have a lot of what I would say garbage in the offices. And that actually was driven more by the employees wanting that, not having a lot. We have fresh fruit delivered every day, and again, that is in all of our regions. And the other thing, health and wellness. One thing that we're passionate about in our organization. It was with our original founder. We have a program that's called Turn Gives Back, and I think of that as really healthy as well for the mind. We contribute a lot. And we don't do an employer match at this point in time for things like that. All of ours is through our time and talent. So each region can go out and volunteer wherever they want, as groups or as individuals.
So you mentioned food, so I'm going to wrap up and to do just some quick housekeeping. Just on the Sequoia side, I want to thank all of you for coming to not just this event, but events that we've had in the past. I think this community is really drives so much value for each other, for the speakers, for everybody involved. So thank you for coming. One ask for you, I have sent a survey to your inbox. So just another email from me. I won't send too many more, I promise. But if you could please fill that out, give us feedback, tell us what topics you want to hear about next. Let us know how we did. That's really, really helpful as we go forward. Speaking of food, we still have some food and drink, so please try some of that stuff. It looks great. I have not had a chance to eat it yet, but please do that, and we do have the space for a little while longer. And on that spirit, want to thank Cloudflare again for the space. Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. And thank you to Glint and Sequoia folks who are here and partnering to build this event. And then Sarah, Jose, and Sue. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys.